Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephanie Charrington with Eastside Pathways, the backbone. Thanks for being here. We've got a good group to get us started here. I see folks are already, thank you for doing so, opening up the chat. And I invite others as you're joining in to please open your chat and include your name, the community or organization with which you're affiliated, and your email address because we absolutely want to make sure that everybody's able to connect with one another. We include this in a roster at the end. If you do not want to have your name included, please make sure to private message Joe Trotty, who's on our team. Speaking of our team, I want to take a quick second and introduce our team. I already mentioned Joe, who is our communications manager, running our slides behind the scene. Joe, give us a wave. Thanks. We also have Kalika Curry, who is our community impact manager, our facilitator for today, and Sandy Nathan, also one of our community impact managers, facilitators. We also have Peyton Richardson, who is our data officer, and we have Vicki Yu, who is our business and operations manager, running things behind the scenes here for us. So just a really quick, we're not going to go through all the logistics that we normally do about the call, but just a quick reminder that we often and we absolutely want to hear your voices. This is about sharing with each other. We invite you to unmute. When you do unmute, if you can please just say your name and then share your input, that would be great. If you're calling in, it's *6 to do that. And just a reminder that this will all be recorded, as will the breakout sessions at the end, and can be viewed and shared with others in your community or organizations afterwards. So moving on to our results for today. By the way, this is our 15th call, if you weren't keeping track, although we do. And to help folks get your minds into this setting and to get us ready to work, you may recall that we started out by sharing our needs and what people had available. We also talked about being mindful about populations traditionally being missed and co-developing solutions. We also did some visualization a few weeks back, looking forward 6 months, which seems like forever now, especially in the state that we're in, and then doing some backward mapping right now. And in order for us to really do this work effectively and come out at the end of the 6 months with a community that is slightly different, than hopefully greater, much different than we had going into this, much better. We talked about utilizing some specific skills, and adaptive leadership, community engagement, data practices were among some of those skills. And then you all actually self-selected into focus areas of work. And we're going to continue that work today by doing breakout sessions later on in the call, and you'll continue to diagnose the current state in those specific areas of focus. We've also talked throughout all of these calls the importance of relationships, because it is relationships with the resources that you're able to bring that actually drive to results. You'll have the opportunity here. It's in these meetings, these convenings that we have on a weekly basis. We call it building the container. It's building those relationships that are really, really key. It's the importance of building relationship with each other as we're on these calls, but then also continuing to build relationship between these calls with those who may not be here. When we think about the work that happens on these calls, it's our opportunity to kind of take respite from our day-to-day work to really think about how we're working together in our community, neighborhoods, organizations, etc., and how we can be better at working with each other.
Again, I think Stephanie was just driving home that we know that we only have 90 minutes on these calls with you all each week. And what's really critical is that we're using this as just a check-in point to do that collaboration, generate ideas, and take those quick action steps in between those calls. We know and want to acknowledge the great work that all of you are doing on a daily basis in your personal and professional lives to help serve our community. And so just acknowledging that and also recognizing that that is really what drives the work in our community. Also wanting to offer that we'll continue to hold an additional 15 minutes after the call. So if folks want to stick around and jump into a small breakout room or continue to use the private chat to continue conversation after the 90 minutes, if you have that additional time, we will be keeping the presentation or the Zoom call open for you. Gonna move us to our next slide. Thanks, Joe. So when Stephanie comes back here with me, we wanted to take a moment to do another fishbowl. For those of us who haven't participated in fishbowls before, fishbowls are just a really great way to go deep, allow people to be courageous or brave, if you will, in a public space. In a way that they might not ordinarily do. We know that when we're in a one-on-one conversation, we have a tendency to go a lot deeper than we do in large group conversations for multiple reasons, whether you're more of an extrovert or an introvert, or you might have a really deep relationship with an individual that allows you to go that deep. And Stephanie and I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of model, for those of us who have been in the Eastside Pathways office or our awesome team, we can have some really high heat conversations in our office, but we have the relationships to support that. And our team often uses gracious space to really ground ourselves and talk about what's coming up for us in not only our professional lives, but our personal lives. So today in our breakout sessions, Vicki will be moving you into small groups of 3. And in those groups of 3, we're going to offer the gracious space question to reflect on, in what ways do you interact with others that are intentional and positive? And we're asking you to really hone in on this personal, local, and immediate, really thinking about during the time of COVID, in response to COVID, how are you intentionally and positively engaging for other people? And I'll answer that question for myself as we're waiting for Stephanie to come back here. I'd say first and foremost in my professional life, I have such a deep gratitude for everybody on this call and people who aren't on this call that are doing phenomenal work in our community. And a lot of times those conversations are not only about advocating for the people and the work that's happening on this call, but for me personally advocating for my kids. For those of you who don't know, I have 3 children, one in middle, high school, and elementary school, 2 boys and a girl. And so a lot of this work that we're talking about as it relates to education and the experiences of students in our community, as well as particularly students of color in my case, it's really critical that we're doing this work together. And I can offer that it takes a lot of patience for me because I want changes now. I want things to look different now. It's really hard for me as a mixed race person, as we're looking at data, to see numbers that say kids who look like mine aren't going to have the same experiences as their peers. And that's really heavy for me. And so I would offer that as I'm having conversations, I'm speaking my truth. I'm talking about the experiences that my students are having, that I as their parent am having, and myself as a professional of color, the experiences that I'm having. So it's a burdensome conversation, but I'm also coming from a deep place of gratitude. So I'm going to have Vicki move us into our breakout sessions. Again, taking that question with you, you're going to have about 5 minutes for the 3 of you. So just wanting to take a moment to connect with each other and really take the space you need to talk about what's coming up for you, what are the conversations we are having, and being really mindful of the fact that everybody is impacted by COVID and being in quarantine. So wanting to create that moment to check in with each other. So we'll see you back in a couple minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. I know that always seems so brief. Hopefully you got to have some great conversation with a couple people from this space. I really just enjoy being able to have that moment to either connect with someone new or catch up with someone that you already have a relationship with. So I'm wanting to invite a couple people just to kind of share what was coming up for you in your Gracious Space breakout session. Feel free to use that chat box. Again, if you don't already have it open, you can open the chat box using the ribbon at the bottom of your screen. And then also unmuting yourself if you're on the phone, that's *6. So just a couple people want to share what was coming up for you in your breakout.
Hey, Kalika, it's Tammy.
Hi.
2 of us, Mandy and I, came on late, and blanking on first name, help me, with the YMCA.
Heather.
Heather, thanks, Heather. And we really didn't know what to expect for this gracious space comment. And I think what happened was, I think that we were able to like look at each other and think about how difficult it is for us right now in responding to each other in an intentional way, and just recognizing that we're all doing the best that we can at this time.
Thank you. Thank you for that check-in. I'm gonna invite a couple more people to share.
Hi, Kalika. It's Vernell. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thank you.
I'm well too. Being intentional, I just shared at the end of our chat about I'm holding space for kids just to be able to see each other. It's like recess for them. And since I teach PE, all of us specialists, we can hold about 50 or 60 kids all at once on the screen. And we go through some activities and some workouts and some songs and things like that. But just outside of their regular class that they might see, they get to see others across grade level, or even in their grade level, and across teachers. And so just they're so good to see them, and just grateful that they get to see each other, because that socialization that they're not getting to practice or witness is not happening. And so just right in the growth spurt of their lives, it's snatched away. So just glad to provide that and connect with them in that way.
Thank you for now. Okay, gonna invite one more person to check in here. Thank you. Seeing some great contributions in the chat here around how we're modeling and showing up in public. I think that's a really great reminder. Thank you, Erica. For those of us who are big practitioners of gracious space, I just want to offer the value of gracious space for me is being able to really like hone in and focus, especially as I'm working remotely. You might often see I have one of my children right over my shoulder, my dog. So it really just helps me ground myself and really focus on you all the best that I can while working virtually. It also helps me set an intention for how I'm going to work during this time. And ultimately, hearing from all of you is helping me understand, how do I hold space for you? Quite often, you might hear people check in with, how's your weather today? So if someone's got thunder and rain clouds, we can be really mindful. As we're doing adaptive work, a lot of times it can cause some discomfort, or heat we might talk about. And so knowing how all of you are doing allows us to understand how quickly we can go. And so I'm going to continue to ask you to hold what you heard from other people and think about how you can extend gracious space to one another across this 90 minutes that we have together. I'm going to switch slides here, please, Joe. Thank you. And as always, we're going to start this meeting getting into the technical work with those action commitments. Wanting to create just a moment to have people check in and update and share what's the work that you've been doing as it relates to driving this work in response to the needs of the community during this time. I know quite a few people in those breakout sessions were taking action commitments as you're making connections on these calls. So wanting to create, we've got about 10 minutes here to have people share some updates. Please do try to be brief so that we can get as many people checked in here as possible. But ultimately, we want to hear, what are the little incremental changes or action that you've been able to drive in between these calls? It could be something momentous as, serving an additional 100 people some meals, or having that coffee to update someone else on the work that's been happening on these calls. So I'm going to put myself on mute and wanted to give you all about 10 minutes to share some brief updates as it relates to this work that we're doing together in our community. If you would like me to call on you and feel a little bit nervous about unmuting, please feel free to use the raise the hand function. You can do that by either on the ribbon, or if you click on the ... on your folder, or your photo, excuse me, then that'll also raise your hand. So feel free to use that raise the hand function, and I'm happy to call on you as well. any updates that you all have been doing since we met last Tuesday? I hear someone on mute. Ward? Oh, no.
But what did she get?
Mandy, I see you've got your hand raised. Go ahead, Mandy.
So I've also been going to meetings at Eastside Interfaith, which is basically different churches coming together to figure out how to serve the community. And we've been talking about offering like food to various agencies and shelters and things like that. So I've just been doing different Zoom meetings across the board, and also checking in. I'm sheltering in place, so I just check in with my consumers in either email or the phone. And if I have resources on COVID-19, I've been sending those out. My biggest thing is we want to know exactly how the students in special ed for the Lake Washington School District and Bellevue School District, how we can support them during this time. And if you guys have any suggestions around that, because we are funded for people that are 14 up to 24, even though I work all the way up with to people that are older adults. So we'd like to know how to, we'd like to know more ideas about that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy. So I'm hearing kind of a check-in on the work that you've been doing, but then also this request to collaborate. I want to invite people and remind you again, please use that private chat function if you want to privately message Mandy. If you would like to make some action commitments to connect with her offline or have any recommendations, also feel free to put in the chat box any thoughts or recommendations that you have. Love to hear some, if not you, if you know someone she might connect with to help solve for that, that would be great. We'd love to have those resources shared. So thank you, Mandy. Wanting to remind people that the work that you all did last week was to start to have that dialogue around what are the factors, what are the things that are driving the current state in those 5 areas: food, housing, remote living and learning, funding, and then the overall social emotional health and well-being category. So wanting to invite some people to think about what are some things are conversations like Mandy that you may have had between today and last Tuesday's call that might be helpful for other people to hear about work that's happening in the community. I know I'm getting tons of great emails about all the phenomenal work you all are doing. So wanting to lift that up. I see Janet's unmute. Are you ready, Janet? Was that intentional? I don't know, Janet, if you meant to unmute yourself. I can lift up a word shared in the chat box that they're distributing gift cards to students and their families on the East Side. So thank you for sharing that update.
I'll share from Lake Washington. It's Gloria, Equity Director. I think the last time I talked about the data and the absence of data, that we are doing things to increase family outreach and engagement, especially when it comes to family and communities we haven't heard from. So one of the things I think is important is our connections work, that for students that we are not hearing from online or getting feedback back from that are doing remote learning, that today we had a meeting to follow up with principals about the data around the students that are possibly going to get incompletes or the check-in around that. And I think it's really great that it was a secondary meeting and so many of the principals talked about the creative ways that they're doing outreach, not just I'm going to send an email and not get anything back. We actually have schools, counselors, teachers, and some administrators that are doing distance home meetings, going to knock on doors with their counselors to make that one-on-one contact. And going beyond just an email. There's multiple steps online and through email, personal letters home, phone calls with students and families. So I think that's really important, that it's not just a base level of we haven't heard from a student and that's it. So I'm glad that that's going well for buildings and that they're doing beyond basic outreach to ensure as small a number of our students as possible end up with incompletes, that we know that we want them to be to have a grade so that's not more stress in the future, but at the same time that we are reaching out because we know there's social emotional components to their participation.
Thank you so much. I think that sharing is really powerful, recognizing that that's something that we can all do, reflect on how we're communicating and connecting with our clients or end users or consumers, whatever language you use in your area of focus, but thinking about how do you go a step further? How do you make your communication strategies a little bit more dynamic and recognizing the needs of those people that you're wanting to serve and thinking about how you can go that extra step. And that's really powerful. And I can offer that my kids are in Lake Washington School District, and I've been really thankful for seeing that increase in strategies around how to communicate. It's really helpful. So I see that Heather had her hand raised, so going to invite Heather to check in.
Hi, this is Heather with the Bellevue Family Y. Recently, with our last board meeting, there was more interest in wanting to address the needs of our members that are not being seen. So for the Bellevue Y, we're trying to make a commitment of how the board can be more engaged with marginalized communities, with the Bellevue community, as well as have the courageous conversations with our volunteers that way, and just trying to figure out some better engagement as we move forward with some of the physical distancing that will have to happen when facilities start to open up more, and just what does it mean for those that are still afraid to come out, and how is it that we can continue to support them.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for that so much. I want to lift up kind of what I'm hearing around being mindful of, in some ways, we talk about retention, right? There's people that we were serving and we're no longer serving them, but then also putting this focal lens on there to say, who are those critical populations that we really want to put our focus on, and get all those heads around the table to think about how we can strategize to connect and serve with them. And I think, again, that's relevant for all of us on this call. Want to give you just 60 seconds on this last call last week, and I know this feels quick, but use that chat box. Last week, we did hear from a couple people. As Stephanie had mentioned, we funneled into these 5 focus groups. Over the course of calls, everybody was checking in individually from their lanes of expertise, the organizations and communities, and then over a series of exercises, we asked you to funnel into these 5 areas of focus. Wanted to really just take a pause as the backbone staff as we're designing and facilitating these meetings to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, wanting to make sure that we're not losing areas of focus. And if you feel like, you know what, guys, I love these top 5 areas, but you know, if my son were on this call, he'd be like, why are we talking about gaming? We need to talk about gaming. I would ask you, where do you see gaming fitting in? And so in this really silly example, I'd probably say that gaming fits in with remote living and learning. So I just want to offer, if you are someone who feels like the areas of focus that you came on these calls to address have not been lifted up, where might you plug that in? So just wanting to give you that moment to think about, you know, we've got 90 minutes, we've got a certain amount of capacity, but let's figure out how do we get all those issues in the room and make sure that we're not leaving any of you all behind. And I also want to share that our backbone staff is thinking a lot about retention. Peyton and Vicki have been doing a phenomenal job in tracking all the attendance, who's on the calls, for how many minutes are on the calls, and we're constantly looking at that data because you all matter to us and the contributions that you bring to these calls matter. So just wanting to create that pause. Also, if you're new on this call, please do look at those 5 areas of focus and let us know in the chat box now which breakout session you would like to be in. So I'm going to just pause there because I've been doing a lot of talking. Let you look at the slide and use that chat box to give us that feedback so we can make some adjustments to help support you. And then I'm going to pass it to Peyton. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take that as the chat box is pretty quiet, that everybody feels good. And again, if you feel like something is missing, bring that up in your breakout session. If you feel like, you know what, guys, I'm doing this work every single day and we're really missing the mark on this, bring that out in your breakout groups. That's the critical information that we're looking to you to share. Each of you has a very unique perspective in the community. Each of you is doing unique work. And when you bring that onto these calls, that's where we see that growth. That's where we deepen our understanding of our community. So thank you for allowing me to facilitate. I'm going to pass it to Peyton and I'll see you in a couple minutes.
Thank you, Kalika, and thank you everyone for continuing to join us, as we work towards moving towards solutions for these populations that you all are raising during these calls. It's just really, really wonderful work. A quick summary of what we're going to be doing today, looking at some of the factor analyses that the focus groups lifted up last week, and then looking at a journal prompt to get us to reflect on some ways of measurement. And again, taking a look at the performance measurement 2 by 2 to keep familiarizing ourselves before we end with a brief poll. So really that's what we're going to be looking at today in this data section. So the first thing that we're going to look at on this next slide is the factor analysis summary for each of the focus areas that you broke it into last week. So there are going to be 5 slides. They're going to look pretty similar to this. So the backbone recognizes that maybe 2 weeks ago, we talked about the importance of doing this work, being deep, and kind of staying in your lane. We can go to the next slide, Joe. That was fine. Doing this work and staying in your lane and making sure that you had trust in other folks that were doing the same work in their lane. So it is upon us, the backbone, to make sure that we are lifting up back to the group all of this great work that's happening in these focus areas. One brief thing, I know that there are some folks in the chat who either felt that they wanted to change or that maybe they're new. So these rosters that we see here are either folks that signed up or were in the focus groups last week. That's why those names are here. It's not an assignment, it's just the data that we have leading up to today's call. So looking at this slide and the 4 slides after it, I want to just bring up a couple things. When we look at these slides, I want you all to really think about 2 main things. One is, as it says in the Equity Lens Collective Impact Toolkit, like, who is missing in that focus population? And we're really asking that because we have this collective group on the call here, and we really want you all to be able to lift up missing focus populations and put them in the chat box so that those specific breakout groups can add them to their focus population. So if there are missing populations that you see here, please do add them. And additionally, as we go through these slides, take a look at the focus populations, the deltas, the pluses, and see if there are any themes that are coming up, things that are common across these 5 areas that we've identified. Maybe that will signal that we need to, lift up some deltas or some pluses or some focus populations that, we are all working towards in each of these 5 areas. So I want to make sure that we are adding focus populations within each of these groups, but also looking at the themes. And again, if we go through this too quickly, these will all be in the Google spreadsheet, the Google Drive that we make available after the call. So if you want to look at this for reference later, that is great. But again, just look at the focus populations and the themes, and also one area that the little toolbox on the right does talk about, like the area of adaptation. When we're adding focus areas and when we're thinking about themes, what action items might you take to invite those folks to this work, to this collective, to make sure that their voice, that focus population can be heard from and be and actually be involved. Mandy, you raised your hand. I want to make sure that I honor that. You're on mute, sorry.
Okay. I hope I'm not going off on other topics, but I just wanted to let people know that my Alliance got a whole bunch of masks, both cloth masks and public health masks that they have. And so we're trying to give them out to consumers. So, and if anyone else feels we got a whole bunch. So if anyone feels that maybe somebody in the community needs a mask, you might want to, you can contact me, Mandy@disabilitypride.org. I can put that in there.
Thank you. That is really, really helpful. Again, masks. And yeah, Mandy, if you could please put that in the chat, that would be super helpful for folks kind of going through that. But thank you very, very much as we continue to share resources. That's obviously incredibly important right now. So moving on to the next slide, again, keeping the same theme of what focus populations are missing from housing, and what common themes from housing and now food have you seen in the deltas and the pluses. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds, not going to talk too much through this slide, but again, please type in that chat box, and while typing, remember that if there are action commitments to bring those folks to this table, to this breakout group, to this collective, do think about that as we move forward. Right, so I'm going to, again, these will be in the Google Drive, so don't worry, that you can see these again. Here we have remote living and learning. Again, keep in mind the common threads and focus populations that you see here that are really affected by remote living and learning that might not be currently on this slide. And again, it is for the benefit of the breakout group and larger collective. And here we have funding. So I'm going in about 2 seconds to invite Stephanie to talk about this. But again, keeping the common themes of focus populations and deltas and pluses, I want to invite Stephanie to talk a little bit about the baseline, which I've highlighted here with a little circle. I know that took some really strong work from the group to come up with this baseline, but I want to talk a little bit about what that current state means and why it's important to have a current state to create deltas and to create pluses, to work off of. So Stephanie, if you're there, I will hand it over to you to talk a little bit about reaching that baseline and those approximated numbers within the funding breakout group.
Thanks, Peyton. Yeah, I joined on the phone. I have to apologize. I'm really sorry, everybody, for dropping. For some reason, we lost internet at our house, so I apologize. But I was able to join here on the phone. I just wanted to jump in really quickly and add, it is somewhat nerve-wracking for some to put numbers down on paper. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that this is all an iterative process, and it's important to put something down and follow it, meaning that our work is to continue to bring back data and refine. So it's a starting point, and we're just going to continue to get better. And as we get more information and data, that number will become more real. I think it is a real number for what we know right now, but as we gather more information and come together more, it'll just become more refined, and it's an iterative process. I just wanted to point that out, that it can be nerve-wracking for some to have it in writing, that this is somewhat of a guesstimate right now, but it is in this work where we are coming together and bringing more data back to make it even better. So I just wanted to add that in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we'll touch on that when we get to the performance measurement 2x2. But again, wanted to bring that up because there's a lot of TBD in a lot of the slides around the current state. So some of the work that I know we want to do in the breakouts with you all today is for you to really hone in on what that current state is and figure out, are there numbers that you can put there to approximate? Are there action items to go get those numbers that can take place between today's call and next week's call? But again, thank you so much, Stephanie, for kind of grounding us in the work that takes, and that it's not going to be perfect. And here, this is the last breakout session we had, health and wellness, health and well-being. Shout out to my group. This was our group. We did some good work. But again, looking at the common themes and seeing if there are any focus populations that are not there that any of you feel will be impacted around health and well-being. So I'm going to take a pause there to allow you to really look at this slide. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on. And so today's journal prompt is a little bit about measurement. So take time to journal or to unmute in the chat box, or sorry, to type in the chat box or unmute. So one thing about this quote, it's about a 70-year-old quote, And I like it because, you know, as a data guy, what gets measured gets managed, and we all know that to be true, but that's not quite the full story. And that's really why we wanted to put this here, because what gets measured often doesn't get managed or done. And, you know, some things that get managed or done don't get measured. And there's kind of a misalignment in what we want to do versus what we measure, or what we measure and what we want to do. And that kind of leads to the effective question of, how do we correct that misalignment, or how do we align those things? So whose values and needs are reflected in what you are measuring? And do those values and needs reflect the community that you want to be serving? There's a lot of potential misalignment if we're not looking at the, you know, the community values or the community needs when we think about measurement. And it's difficult and it's iterative, but I think it's really important to correct that misalignment so that you, in your role, in your organization, in your person, are actually measuring what the community values and what the community needs in order to move that needle towards more equitable practices. So I'm going to give you a few minutes here to just type anything in the chat box or speak what kind of comes to your mind around this effective question.
I just want to thank you, Peyton, for putting this in here. This is a really powerful statement. And it makes me think about, as we're having conversations and as I'm seeing a lot of folks share the work that they're doing, really taking that moment to think about, is this what they asked for? Or have I asked them what they wanted? And I think that this is a really powerful moment to take that pause. So thank you for lifting this up for us.
I'm seeing some really great contributions in the chat. Thank you all. And thank you to those folks who added focus populations. I did not see that while I was talking, but this is really helpful. Thank you, thank you.
Hi, Fernell.
Hi, Fernell again. I just want to shout out also to Peyton for helping the survey that I've put together is because I know the answers from the kids, from the data of their living experience and their voices. And so to put the questions and bring their voices to the center has been so key to be able to move the data around that, because the answer is yes, and but if we don't ever ask, then that data just sits there on the shelf and in the banks. It's been there a long time, but you haven't had the voices, the stories, the experience to match it, to know what the and is. Because you can say, yes, everybody gets shoes, like you said, but and what size do you need? We never go deep enough with the story, and where are you walking? What do you need them for? Is this going to help you? So the surveys I've got are one for students, one for parents and family, and one for staff educators all around the school system, talking about what would your dream school look like? What do you need going back? What do you want to take from our season away from school back into school? How would you want to do this in the future? And nobody asks kids, really. We think we know, we just expect them to give it, and take what we give, and nobody asks them. And so these surveys are really directed on what do you really, really want? I wish I could share the screen with you just to share a few answers. I'm just blown away just by how raw and real they are, and they want to be listened to, and they want to be asked, and not just patronized in the ask. They want the and. Hear me and. So thank you, Peyton, for help with that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for sharing. And there is just incredible entries in the chat. And thank you to all. And I think that what Fernell said and what I'm hearing and reading in the chat really does harken back to what we spoke about a couple weeks ago about the numbers, the quantitative, and the what is extremely important. And I'm seeing great what in the chat. I'm also seeing the great qualitative, the why. getting a little bit deeper beyond just the numbers, like Pernell said, but why do you request this, or why is this a need, to be able to transition services and make them more equitable. So I'm going to move us on, but thank you so much to those folks in the chat. I know I have a couple folks to follow up with directly, and I will. But thank you for, again, this incredibly rich chat. So again, our performance measurement 2x2. I think this is the third consecutive week we've seen it. One of our favorite things. And before I invite Kalika to speak a little bit, there are just 3 brief things I want to talk about. So one, this is again the large 2x2 performance measurement grid for this collective. This is really the work we're all doing together, and really informs how the backbone is continuing to learn in public and continuing to go through continuous improvement to make these make the experience better, make the calls better, with the ideal scenario being that lower right-hand quadrant of 100% of East King County residents have the support and services they need. So this is still at the overall collaborative level. 2 is in that lower left-hand quadrant, difference made, and Stephanie really touched on this. That highlights the current state, and we're going to work through that in your focus groups today. But again, it highlights the current state, and it's not necessarily going to be perfect, but the funding used an approximation upon which you can create deltas and create pluses. But just a quick reminder that the work is iterative. It doesn't need to be perfect to go on. It just needs to go on, and that the numbers may change, what's written may change, but let's ensure that the numbers that we are producing are the evidence of changing systems that we know to be inequitable, and so that we don't wait until we have numbers to start to change the systems, but let the numbers actually be the evidence of the work that we're doing. And I think that's really important as we move forward in pretty uncertain times. And the last thing I'll touch on is, this is, again, I think the second or third time we've seen this grid, this 2x2, at the collaborative level. And as we move forward, once we go through factor analysis, we're going to start to ask you all to fill in this 2x2 in the focus area. So for food, for housing, for remote living and learning, for funding, and for health and wellness. So again, this is the broad, what we're all doing. But as we get to the very specific focus areas, you're going to be filling this out with using the information that you gleaned from the factor analysis and figuring out how to create change. So I'm going to actually invite Kalika to talk a little bit just about the performance measurement, and specifically about some of the community engagement points that are on the right-hand little orange box.
Yeah, thank you, Peyton. You know that I always love putting my lenses on, so to speak. So that bottom right, the better off, as Peyton talked about, we're going to continue to bring this back to you. And again, this is where we're showing the evidence of the work that we're doing on these calls, as well as the work that you're doing in the community. And for me, when I think about that better off statement, recognizing that that was something that was crafted by the backbone, ultimately, I would love to see that change because you all are now in the room. And then as we're connecting with the community and those who are impacted, I would love to see it change again, that iterative process that Stephanie and Peyton have been talking about. Recognizing, for example, the statement right now says that everybody, all the residents have the support and services they need to survive. I would offer, as someone that lives in East King County, I want to do more than survive. I want to thrive. And so knowing that these iterations are those tweaks as we're in dialogue and helps us continue to capture and record the story that's being told and the information that we're holding. When we're moving over to that bottom left, again, last week there were no numbers in there, but for the folks in the funding group, they were able to be courageous and stick to it and just come up with a number. And by the end of this call, we should have numbers for all of the breakout groups. And as you all continue to provide data, real-time data, we'll start to see those numbers become more real, so to speak. And then also hope to see those numbers change and shift. Either they might go down because we recognize that when we said all, we had missed, I think Sue was naming it here in the chat here, we'd missed the population. So that percentage might go down because We thought, oh, everybody in my house is fed. Well, I forgot about my neighbors. And now I have to recognize that only half the people are fed because I missed a group of people. We might also see those numbers come up because when Mandy said, hey, I've got some masks, and now she's sharing them with other people, the number of people in our community who have access of masks has now gone up as a result of this call. So want to lift up those are the examples that are sometimes just really quick connections that do make a difference, and we'll be able to capture that here. And always reminding us that the top right yellow is just how we know those early warning signs. If you're not on these calls, you can't make action commitments. So it's critical, and that's why we're continuing to measure attendance. Not only are you showing up, but are you able to attend the breakout sessions? Because that's where we're going to continue to drive this work. For those of you who might feel like this is exhaustive, let's just get to it. Let's figure out what we need to do. We know that this process is messy and slow, but because we're taking the time to stop to think about who's missing, whose voice is missing, that's how we'll be able to go and do the adaptive work that we want to do together. So thank you, Peyton, for letting me chime in there. And I know Peyton's got a poll for you, so I'm gonna stop there.
Yes, in the spirit of collecting data and making sure that we are learning in public and doing our continuous improvement, Vicky's gonna put up a poll here, maybe leave it up for about 2 minutes. It's three questions, really just so we can get feedback on how we are doing and how each of you are experiencing these calls, so we can be mindful as we move forward. Again, 2 minutes.
Okay, as we're starting to round off this poll, I'm gonna help us get back up on our time here. I'm going to be helping guide you all in preparation for our breakout sessions. And for those of us who are new to this work, Eastside Pathways has adopted a model called the Equitable Results Series. And essentially that's just a sequencing of exercises to help us develop that shared understanding of the result or the common good we want to see in the community. Doing a series of exercises to identify, as I'm seeing a lot of people resonate with in the chat, is really getting some facts about who's in our community and what their experiences are before we develop strategies and solutions. Because I can easily say, everybody wants peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And someone might say, hold up, we have people with peanut allergies. That's a silly example. But again, before we drive solutions, we really do have to stop and think about who are we serving, how many of those people are serving, and how can we do that effectively, equitably, and sustainably. So thank you so much for your patience as we go slow to really be able to diagnose who's in our community and what are the different needs and voices of our community. As always, asking people to listen for those action commitments today. Again, Mandy, thank you so much for modeling that, saying, I have a resource, inviting people who need that to connect with me. And I saw 2 different people say, we would love to be able to take advantage of that. So again, it's those small wins that have impact that continue to help create change in our community. Is the poll here complete? I think, yeah, the poll is closed. Thank you. And then ultimately going to wrap up this meeting just by revisiting that toolkit, wanting to invite people to recognize that a lot of these things, like doing factor analysis that we'll do in just a few minutes, is such a quick and easy way to have that conversation. When Fernell was saying, are you sitting down? Are you having a conversation? It's a cool tool that you might want to try with someone, just saying, hey, I want to know what's going on with you. And then being able to sit longer and really unpack why they're feeling that way, why their experience or their perspective is the way that it is during this time. Before I move you into your breakout sessions, I want to offer that you will have your same facilitators that you had for you last week, and they'll be continuing to chart your factor analysis, picking up right where you left off. We will also be incorporating the contributions that were provided in the chat to that factor analysis. So thank you for those of you who were able to share some missing focus populations, as well as some factors that I saw shared in the chat box. Going to move us slides. I wanted to share this before we moved in because someone shared it with me and it was really, really powerful. The facilitator put this photo up of Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott, and said, I've seen her faces so many times, but I've never heard her voice. And it blew me back because I realized I too had seen her face, and I'm seeing heads nod. I have seen this woman's face and I have never heard her voice. And I want to encourage all of you to think about, who are the faces that you are seeing so often and never hearing their voices? That is a powerful action commitment. How can you connect with the people whose faces you see all the time, but you don't hear their voices? Because if you're not listening, their voices aren't being heard, their voices are not being incorporated in understanding what's happening, let alone in developing the solutions or driving them. Always thinking about that community engagement spectrum. If it's a known solution, if it's technical, you've got it in the bag, it's easy, you can just press play, it's okay to consult with people. However, if you don't know what's going on, if you feel like you're stuck, you're at your growing edge, you just don't know how to go further, that's where that adaptive work has to happen. And when you collaborate and even better, empower those who are impacted to be a part of that process, it's going to be powerful and it's going to be effective, I guarantee you. So I just wanted to give you guys that moment to reflect on that before we move into your breakout sessions. As always, have pen and paper out, be ready to make those action commitments. And Vicki is going to be moving us to our breakout sessions. I'll see you in just a few minutes. I want to thank people who volunteered to do that. I'm going to invite someone from my group to put their name in the chat box if you're willing to volunteer and do that. Really thankful for that rich conversation. It felt great to get back in there, continue the conversations that we've had, and then also in my group deepen our understanding of what we mean when we talk about everybody in East King County has their needs met as it related to our topic. So really thankful for the work that we did. I am going to invite someone from the foods group to share, because I see that on my list here.
So I missed letting my team know that one of them would like to, so I'm going to openly invite. We had some great discussion. Would one of you like to speak to the focus population that we worked on, 1 plus and 1 delta that we discussed, please?
Helena, will you speak?
Thanks, Sammy.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you. Sure. So we focused on bilingual families, and one of the deltas that sticks out in my mind is culturally sensitive food. That may be an issue as to when folks go to food banks or receive food. It may not be food that is part of their normal diet and is problematic that way. And then one of the, and I need my team to help me on this one. We said that the Family Connection Centers was an excellent positive resource because they could get food, they could get information, and also talk with people in their own language there and get all types of support. So people jump in if I've missed something as far as 1 delta and 1 omega. I'm sorry.
1 plus.
Pulling the Greek in here. I love it.
Greek up in here. Is that what's happening? Like Z5 by Z5. Okay.
I'm going to strike while the iron's hot since Mariama is unmuted and have her share for the remote learning team. Got her.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thanks for the invitation, Kalika.
So welcome.
Yeah, so we were the remote learning team, and our focus population was students who have sort of yet to engage with online platforms for learning. Let's see, and we're supposed to say 1 Delta and 1 plus, right?
Yep.
So I'd say one of the deltas that came up for us was just everyone in the system sort of lack of preparedness for this. So our teachers who were unprepared to teach online, and our students who had no understanding of how to learn online as well, or may have not had that knowledge of how to learn online. And then I would say 1 plus that I really appreciated that was brought up was that our teachers, while they may have not been prepared, are actively working to figure out how to best teach online. So doing some just grassroots, connecting with each other and really trying to share those best practices between each other when they figure out something's not working. So those were, just a few of the things that came up in our conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate that summary. All right, I'm going to invite Kathy to speak from funding.
Thanks, Malika. So for funding, our focus population is on the funding for Latina, Hispanic organizations that are supporting that community. And our 1 Delta, I'm actually going to offer 2. So 1 was the newer emergent leaders of Latino focused organizations might have a lack of understanding or support on finding out how the funding process works in order to apply for funding. And then to go along with that is there's no currently Eastside funding forum for like private philanthropy or other philanthropy for learning about those Latino focused organizations. There's lots of funding forums in Seattle. And the, let's see, I did the Delta first, and the plus is the equity movement in general that's supported on the East Side by both Eastside Pathways and several Eastside cities. This is creating an opportunity for the Latino voice and grassroots leaders.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to invite Kathy with a K to share out on behalf of Peyton's group, Wellbeing.
Hi, we actually had a rather lively discussion of, in many of our numbers, we do not have a baseline number exact yet because most of the numbers out there of resources is pre-COVID, and that's widely changing with the needs in mental health and well-being with COVID. For a Delta, we were looking at the stigmatization of asking for help. A lot of people, there may be availability, but they don't know how to get the access, or they don't know how, they don't want to deal with their own shame or need, and so they may not access the help. So we talked about some of that. So how to help people, how to normalize it so that people feel the availability to reach out. As far as a plus, we looked at the expanding of the definition of availability versus access, and how, and also to access for people who, the underpinning, like they might have the stabilization of housing, or maybe they have food now, but to go from survival to thrival. And so we're looking at expanding our mental health and well-being definition to say how do we enfold all of that aspect of it.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to invite a volunteer from the housing group. Your focus population, you discussed a plus and a delta, so driving it up and driving it down. Someone from housing.
This is Alex, and I can jump in. Our focus groups were people who are living doubled up, people who are in need of rental assistance, and people who are undocumented. And 1 Delta is that we have established a kind of a percentage at which we think of this focus group population exists in the community. We said about 50% of the people in these groups will experience housing challenges, but we don't have, our delta is that we don't have data that we, hard data, quantitative data that can help us understand if this is the right number. So that was what we talked about, and how we could use qualitative data to create a narrative that tells the story about the challenges these folks in these focus populations have experienced or are experiencing. And our plus is that there's a lot of advocacy that is available. Advocacy is defined in different ways. One of our members talked about how she thinks advocacy is people who work with people in the community who need help, and they advocate for them through wraparound services, through trusted messengers. And another way is advocacy that is occurring by many people to our elected officials on all levels, local, state, and federal, to ask them to provide help for us and our residents on the East Side.
Thank you, Alex. I want to thank you all for joining us. I know we just have 2 minutes left, so appreciate all the work, appreciate those quick summaries. Know that we, as a Backbone staff, will be sending out to each of the focus groups your notes from today, as well as providing those in the data walk so that everybody will get an opportunity to get a deeper dive into the work that happened in each of these focus groups. As always, wanting to encourage you to make those action commitments, however small or however big you can make, and always thinking about that accountability pathway. I literally keep a copy on my little desk here so I can check in with myself and have an honest conversation around where am I right now, and thinking about what steps can I take to always be on the accountability side of that pathway, which really means sometimes acknowledging reality. We talked a lot about people who are experiencing crisis, and I might just have to say, you know what, I'm in crisis, I can't do anymore, I'm working from home, I've got my kids. Maybe it's best that I ask someone else to take up this task. That might be somewhere where you're at on that accountability pathway, but by acknowledging that reality, you're being accountable. So just wanting to encourage people, if you haven't jotted down an action commitment, think about that accountability pathway. Where are you, and what steps can you take to move yourself further along the path? I'm going to move us to the next slide. I do want to share that all with you all that next week we'll continue to do factor analysis, but we're going to shift gears a little bit and start thinking about, and I saw this in my breakout session, people are starting to gather voices, youth voices, parents' voices, voices of those who we don't traditionally hear from, and help us validate as well as prioritize those factors. So again, someone earlier, Fernell said, you know, we might be giving everybody shoes, but find out that they need different sizes and they have different paths that they're walking on, and we might want to give them different types of shoes. So next week, we're going to be taking time to look at those factors, continue to populate and generate ideas, but then also use the voices of the people who are looking to serve to help validate and prioritize those. They might say, you know what, I've got Wi-Fi. That's not the problem. I just don't have the project management skills to manage this. That's what I need help with. So that's the work that we're going to be doing in our breakout sessions next week. As always, wanting to invite you, and just a reminder of some of the tools that we used on our call today. You can always access this deck as well as the suite of tools on the Google Drive. There's a link to that here. I know you can't click on it right now, but if you go onto the Google Drive, you can access all of this data so you can take more time offline to go a little bit slower. I know we go pretty quick on here. I want to emphasize today the power of the data walk, being able to see the work that each of you did in your breakout sessions, as well as always putting on those different lenses. How can we work adaptively? What is the moment to disrupt and do that racial equity work and that community engagement? How are we holding those who are impacted? Are we putting in a position where we're just consulting with them, or are we shifting our practices so we can put them in a place of collaboration or empowerment? Really looking forward to seeing you all. Thank you for your time and your contributions. We will see you next Tuesday. Be looking for those wrap-up emails so that you can have that data, and we look forward to having you all check in with your action commitments next week. If you'd like to stay on the call, we'll have this Zoom meeting open for an additional 15 minutes. And otherwise, I'll see you on Tuesday at 10 a.m.